their bad side and they'll destroy you.
No one would miss me.
That's not true. I would.
Okay, we're live. Welcome back, party people, to another House Party Live. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to Ross Campbell, our guest this week, for joining us.
And I appreciate the invitation to talk.
We couldn't get Ross's camera working, so you'll have to just look at his pretty face on the slide there on the feed. But, it's okay. Oh, maybe it'll work.
I'm gonna give it one last try, but my Chromebook
do our thing.
Really can't do much.
So Ross is a member of LexDAO along with me. I would say the summoner of the prime summoner of LexDAO.
Prime summoner, I like that.
Or discoverer
and
developer, pilgrim.
Yeah, whatever, sort of manifest out of the ether, the will of the DAO gods, I suppose. Ross has to leave early, so we're going to jump right into the kind of like panel discussion part of this. Ross, do you want to kind of tell everybody about sort of your background and what got us to LexDAO and all that kind of stuff, just to kick off, I guess?
I would love to. First, can people hear me okay?
Definitely better with the video off, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe kill the dead.
1 second. Yeah. All right. Let's give that a second. I think.
Cool. You're good.
It might be audible now.
Yeah.
Excellent. So yeah, LexDAO. What the heck is it? Why am I talking to you guys here today? LexDAO is kind of formed out of, I think, this natural progression of I was lurking on crypto Twitter, especially crypto law Twitter, and I saw a lot of other people like Adam here who are dealing with different sides of the elephant in my mind of like this idea of things like Ethereum are kind of upgrading our property rights system. DAOs are kind of an evolved form of company and sort of partnership, and I could see a lot of lawyers and coders were leaning into this space and creating these really cool legal tech products. So my idea basically with LexDAO is why don't we just house this under a DAO? Why don't we encourage lawyers and legal tech people to learn about the tech by using it to organize, and also to sort of create this sort of shared stakeholder governance and incentive to work together and deliver the full package. We could have 18 different legal tech startups, one just doing real property tokenization, another doing security tokens, another doing DAO company formation and filing. Or we could say, hey, we're all doing really cool stuff. Share notes. Let's not be sort of data silos that put all this stuff under closed source for the next 5 years. And let's see what that kind of looks like. So kind of my awkward start to LexDAO was reaching out to folks and saying, hey, do you want to join a DAO together? It's a total experiment. It might nosedive. It might be a huge waste of our time, but I think it's kind of cool to just start there. So LexDAO was originally deployed as an Aragon DAO, as a basic reputation template. Some of you guys might be familiar with that. Kind of a couple clicks to get there, and then just kind of adding people to that sort of a roster of people that I thought could work together to produce really cool things for ourselves and also for people in the space, like DAOhaus and all these entrepreneurs that are kind of, I think, disrupting law, even if they're not intending to, by putting all their assets and sort of their agreements onto blockchain. So that's kind of a rough start introduction to, the why, the how, this sort of chaotic formation of LexDAO. But, even though in some ways I might be a summoner or whatever, I feel like LexDAO is inevitable, in that, lawyers are going to try to work together, and they're going to form associations that are more tech forward. And I'm largely bullish on the only tech that matters for lawyers will be property rights and programmable money on things like Ethereum and smart contracts. So it's like taking the bull by the horns and kind of trying to be the first mover there. Like something like LexDAO is going to happen in the next 2 years anyway. Kind of moving from that, there are, I think, a lot of core sort of cool things lawyers can do in the space, and I guess, going to the earlier emphasis that I, talked about in the formation of LexDAO, whatever we do in this space, I think lends well if we open source it and make it super easy to use and kind of get coders involved. So, security tokens, thinking about how can we take, traditional company ownership rights, put them into a tokenized form so then they can be, used to vote programmatically, kind of in the Moloch DAO style, or trade on Uniswap. Those things seem really exciting. And I think a lot of projects will learn more about that and how to sort of hard code some of the time restrictions and other, maybe regulatory issues around sort of these new equity tokens. So like that was one pillar, I think, in early LexDAO research and kind of what we put into our, our GitHub repos. And also, I kind of forgot to mention this point. We're trying to create a new sort of hybrid practice between smart contract coding and I guess, lawyering called legal engineering. And kind of the larger point I'm trying to make here is that, lawyers aren't the only ones that are going to do cool stuff, trying to, program people and their assets to cooperate better into the future, kind of filling the gaps of, private contract and, promises. Coders are doing this already. One example that I think is probably familiar to you guys and what was coded by Amin and James Young was, Moloch contract. The Moloch contract is, I think, a great primitive for thinking about companies, investment clubs, these sort of for-profit associations can be entirely represented by code. When I say that, one thing that might be helpful for non-lawyers, most companies are simply just a collection of agreements. And, the familiar thing, I think, maybe to some of the people in this group is an LLC, which is largely just a very bare bones filing with the state to announce your presence, and a private operating agreement. The operating agreement, I think, lends well to Moloch DAOs and other sort of DAO contracts because they basically set rules between members and other people that might join together, contribute capital, and also how they can kind of get kicked out. One cool, I think, idea in Moloch V2 is the idea of the token swap being represented by, I guess, a proposal process. So you make a proposal to join Moloch DAO, you're making an offer that is accepted by the current membership entirely using code. So you might say, yeah, like here's 10 ETH for 100 shares. That has a legal consequence. A lot of these things used to be accomplished by years and back and forth negotiation and coordination of banks and other sort of people to make sure that shares were assigned properly, cap tables were updated, and money was sent where it was supposed to between bank accounts. Now with Moloch DAO, I'd say, hey, I want to join your guild, I want to join your company even, and the thing will be settled automatically if it's accepted. So you have offer acceptance, you have the consideration or the value of the deal, and the sort of tribute offer to join the membership, and then immediate settlement without any need to hire or involve intermediaries. So that's already a sort of disruption that's happening in the space. I think like lawyers either need to help code or at least understand to offer as an alternative to saying, hey, just form another paper company, Ghoststripe Atlas. People can deploy on DAOhaus or Aragon or whatever for very cheap, and then have self-enforcing sort of subscription agreements and other sort of cool deals, without having to write, long-form contracts. So that's kind of one idea that I think is kind of cool to think about, and extending it with legal engineering, and I guess in the area of LAOs and kind of what I'm doing with open law is, how can we take more regulated forms of cooperation or association, like a for-profit, venture club, and, how could we make that the least friction and most legally protected way to, do these things with code. So with the LAO, we have a sort of public-facing entity, a registered LLC, but kind of in the vein of Gabriel Shapiro and his code deference approach, we just say like, the fallback option for figuring out what these people are doing together is the blockchain code. It's the Moloch DAO smart contract. And even though we have this sort of public filing and LLC wrapper, the source of truth for what's going on with members is in the code. So there's that aspect, and of course,
I love.
Was there?
I was gonna say I love hearing the perspective of someone with a law background, because we get so sucked into some of the.
Oh yeah, no, I'm like ranting. I can vamp on this all day.
Well, no, I love it because it's like we focus on like the social aspects and the kind of like the gravity that a DAO brings to community, and really like the transparency and these disruptive things that you're talking about is like a huge benefit and a huge sale of what a DAO is,
Well, I think
and in some ways lawyers overcomplicate things, but I think all we're really trying to do, both on the side of like smart contract developers and corporate attorneys, like myself, is just like make deals happen with the least amount of leakage. And largely people are the problem, and people kind of playing telephone games to make sure assets and accounts are updated is usually why legal contracts are so long and difficult to understand. People have to go to law school to speak the language. These things are just user applications. And I guess, really the relevance of law more is an afterthought of, can we close any gaps, if DAO members can identify each other so that they can't haul us into court and create liabilities that aren't already covered by the sort of agreement hashed out on chain, with these smart contracts. So the typical example I give here of like why you should, wrap, a DAO as a LAO or, an LLC wrapper is, DAOs still want to do business transactions, with contractors. They want to fund people over, maybe long-term engagements that aren't settled, like a tribute for DAO shares. You might, pay a developer to work over a course of months to deliver, services or goods. And, those create liabilities because there's expectations. And we don't have a great way to use smart contracts to make sure people do what they do, or that they don't make assumptions about what was promised. So that's kind of the idea of, we can protect the membership of DAOs when they fund people by saying there is one sort of source of liability, and that rests in sort of this registered entity. And you can't go after any individual DAO member in their bank accounts to account for, deals gone bad. So that's one heat sink, but also, kind of what I think is interesting and, what you proposed, Deacon, is, why not make funding proposals a bit more clean in terms of what's promised and what's expected after you pay somebody, with DAO shares, or you pay somebody at the guild bank. So those are kind of two things that I think are top of mind for like legal engineers right now, is like, can we understand what these sort of associations and these partnerships are from a legal sense, and can we make them a bit less leaky, more secure? And then on the the practical side, like, can we represent agreements both on chain and have that instant settlement, but then the predictability of, if things go bad, what's the next step? I think if people understand clean path to what's next, then they're more likely to use DAOs and they're more likely to do deals. And that's really the role of lawyers, is just to make things happen. And that's also what Solidity and other developers try to do. It's just make things happen. So
I think
one question that I would like, that I was thinking about recently was that we have. So you're talking about kind of like DAOs paying people, and one thing we talk about a lot, and I've talked about it with you, is like these DAO to DAO interactions.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I wonder how, or what is your like legal perspective on that? Like, how is that just like two LLCs working together, or how does that actually like work?
Yeah. So, when you think of agreements, it's almost like you see this, these connections, these ligaments, and it's really important just to figure out what gets attached, particularly in terms of liabilities and what can actually be seized from those parties. So that's why it's helpful, DAO to DAO, to say like, we're merely acting as an LLC versus an LLC, and if there's a suit or other sort of problem in that interaction, then the DAO members themselves are protected, because the state allows us to at least have these weird sort of legal fictions called companies, that allow us to separate out business risk and pooled capital, and allow entrepreneurs to actually get things done. every time you wanted to sell a product or do a service, you had to have personal liability. Nobody would ever do anything because you could like personally go bankrupt if somebody like or if somebody doesn't like your product or you violate some sort of trademark or something. So it's sort of like a logical cost of doing business, and I don't think the DAO context changes these sort of usual concerns and protections when you're doing business. DAOs are very good at accelerating coordination and the settlement of financial assets, but people, when they do business with each other, they still want sort of predictability about if we don't have an on-chain liquidation mechanism, then what will a judge do? There's still a threat active for anybody doing any sort of financial transaction. So that it's almost like we're trying to reckon the world of these two different ledgers and settlement systems. And as long as DAO members are identifiable, they're all kind of at risk of this sort of attack vector, which is somebody, sending mail to your house and saying, you have to go to Nevada and hear this court case, or we're going to like seize your house or something,
Yeah.
The
thing that I frequently point out is sort of like, you can't, I think people in the sort of crypto and the sort of crypto anarchist side of this stuff that are like, hey, we're inventing this whole new thing. There's an undeniable part where, I live in the real world. You can see my face on this live stream right now, right? As a member of like Haus DAO, unless I'm completely anonymous, I'm not protected from the fact that I live in the real world and people can identify me, which means that letter can show up and make me reckon for whatever is happening, like relative to the jurisdiction that I'm in. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there are default, like if you live in a jurisdiction and you pay taxes and you use the roads and blah, 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 there's a whole bunch of default rules that are just gonna apply. And so if you don't go to the government and say, I'm starting a company, it's an LLC, I want to avail myself of these, particular protections, then they just treat you as another thing. Right? And if you have a bunch of people working together that don't say, hey, we want to do it in this specific way that the law lets us, then you're just a general partnership. And that can get really messy once you do have a dispute. And that's how those letters end up showing up, right?
And speaking of the dispute, so that's another really cool thing on this DAO to DAO kind of space. I mean, there's going to be disputes. There's going to be members.
Yeah, human's going to human.
There's going to be like disputes with clients. There's going to be DAO to DAO disputes. And so having a DAO of legal engineers is super powerful. And so it's really great for the ecosystem because
I think so.
Even though we can solve our problems internally, right? We can try to at least. And so that's another like the interaction between DAOs.
Well, so I think the interesting thing to broaden it a tiny bit to the legal engineering concept, just to be clear, like when Ross and I talk about legal engineering, it's not really just lawyers who code. It's really both sides of that equation and sort of like merging in the middle, right? Like there are coders who could realize that they're bumping into the legal things and think about things a little more like lawyers do. And then there's lawyers who could learn to code. And really at LexDAO, we think in the middle, there's this space that's, mainly I want to make sure people don't think that we are, this is just for lawyers and people who understand it, right? I think lawyers ultimately an emergent profession from the quirks of trying to coordinate human behavior, for centuries of doing it in a way where we go, it would be a public good to have fair dispute resolution and enforceable agreements. And we go, okay, so now you have a legal system, right? And then you have lawyers who are the operatives in the legal system. In the same way, if we want to have functional smart contracts, that help us with human coordination and ultimately handle disputes in a fair way, we end up with this sort of legalistic thing, right? And I know in the real world, a lot of things get real boring once lawyers are involved because that system is so developed and there's so many sort of rules, but it's kind of the same. Like, yeah, but I think the reason, like the thing that's so cool for me to see emerge in the Ethereum space is the need for the same things. And I know that sort of sounds like a bummer because it sounds like the door through which lawyers jump and then it all gets boring again. but for me, it's this thing that's like this should be a reminder to lawyers that we serve this broader purpose of human coordination that is emergent from, like, yeah, we made up the joint stock corporation, and that was great for the development of capitalism, and ultimately, all of these things that like help us cooperate to make money and attain prosperity, like whatever you want to call it. We ended up needing the lawyers and the law to support that. And in the same way, like as we start to imagine different ways to do that, we're running into the same problems. And ultimately, the cool thing is we could move through it faster if everyone wasn't so sort of like, but then the lawyers show up and now it all sucks. And like, I think what we're trying to do with LexDAO is hopefully breed out the things that suck while remembering that, that the need for someone to explain a complicated system or someone to help you through this complicated system is always going to be there, right?
The breed of lawyers that are coming into the crypto space are the interesting ones, at least.
I hope so.
Well, you guys probably look at it as an opportunity, right, to like iterate on the law and like to iterate on these systems that you guys have interacted from the legal side, and then like this is like an opportunity to like be able to like rethink that. They're definitely going to run into some of the same things, but now there's a new way to address those things.
Well, and hopefully they end up being answers for one another. For example, like trying to explain open source ideology, not even methodology, just the idea that open source could exist to like traditional lawyers is a really funny exercise, because they go, you what? You don't protect the intellectual property? What is this? And then people just help, and you're like, oh, your reaction is it's like your reaction is so much a sign of what's wrong with the non-Web3 legal industry. But at the same time, the thing where it's like, okay, but I also could see how you maybe couldn't even think about how to have a contract that is collaboratively owned by the public, essentially. And so, my hope is that we could go to the side where everyone does understand open source, come up with solutions, and then figure out how to mesh those back into the other systems so that, so they work nicely together.
So, Ross, like, we don't have a lot of time left, but I always like to, when I get my other crypto friends on the spot in this thing, I like to just ask them like more personal, like, what got you into the crypto space originally? Like, what was your path to get? I know you've been around for a while, but like, how'd you get hooked up with Consensus, and how'd you like, what was that like?
Wow. I mean, I was definitely in the wilderness for a while. Freelance. I think the first company I worked for, in a real sense, as a legal engineer, was called TrustLayer, and we kind of, I don't think we really succeeded, but we at least had a proof of concept of having on-chain NDAs and sort of associating people with this sort of template of an NDA on chain and saying, yeah, you now have a trust relationship. So like, it was a lot of, dowsing for water and trying to find the kernels of patterns and things that I thought were actually relevant to lawyers. And I think really, what got me into open law and consensus was this fixation on, DAOs and using, I guess, these traditional legal structures like the flexible LLC to promote them as real sort of investment vehicles. So it was a lot of hustling, but also my fixation was how do I achieve complete control and power over my agreements? And blockchain and smart contracts on Ethereum was like, I would never have to talk to a person ever again to form a company and create payment schemes and do all these other things. And there might be elements of misanthropy in sort of these fixations, but largely I think it's, for young lawyers and people like me, who came out of big law and kind of more traditional law firm background, is this is how millennials empower themselves against these old systems. And if you're kind of helping draw the curtain back on what's happening in Ethereum, with these developers who, abhor legal systems and are, really creating an alternative, like you can really, I think, find real opportunities in liberation. So, it's one day I'll maybe write like a blog post about like how I, quote unquote, fell into the cliche rabbit hole of crypto and doing engineering. But still, my nose is still so much glued to the map of figuring out what are the core primitives of agreements, and how do we do this with code? How do we knock out every sort of person as a risk factor to achieving a meeting of the minds, as it were? So yeah, it's definitely it's been great, and I think it probably resembles a lot of other lawyers who kind of fall into this space. And I guess my phrase at the most basic would be professional FOMO. I cannot stand the idea that some other associate would sort of rewrite the law in sort of a code and enforceable base using smart contracts. So
Front run.
some people might call me a law school or something.
That's awesome. How'd you?
Well, I was just gonna say it's an interesting place to expand the idea of trustlessness. That we talk about trustless systems a lot, in crypto, and the law is an interesting place because every contract still has this weird thing where we go like, well, we do trust contracts, but part of it's because we live in the U.S. and we have a functional judicial system that uses the law to back up your contract. But ultimately, there's just a human promise in there. I signed a thing, but if I don't turn in my rent check, there isn't an automatic solution, even though I violated that agreement. Like someone has to go, okay, now I'm suing you. And then the law probably pretty quickly will enforce the contract. And then, there are gaps in that system that when we look at it with trustless, through that trustless lens, like Ross, like you're saying, we can get the humans out to an extent, potentially, at least in the places where, your security deposit should just get returned unless somebody proactively says it shouldn't, instead of the other way around, which is your security deposit just gets kept most of the time, unless you threaten to sue your landlord, and that's just an abuse of that, the trust that exists inside of that contract, right?
This is a super interesting conversation, and so we got to do it again sometime. I think you.
Yeah, I gotta hop, unfortunately.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but I see there's Bill and Adam, your legal engineers. You can take it home and answer questions and stuff. I've rented enough, but yeah, thanks for the time, and I hope to do this again sometime. See you guys.
Thanks for us. Yeah.
Thanks for jumping in. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if we want to continue the LexDAO conversation, I can ramble. I don't know if Bill, wants to talk at all. He's also a LexDAO member. He literally just popped in, so welcome. Be on the live stream.
Yeah, thank you. I've gotten my time zones all messed up, so I'll let you ramble if people want to continue.
Well, we can also move on to house business. But you were saying, Ben?
Can Kerp ramble though? I don't know.
For sure.
Last question.
Oh, I get it.
So when you guys are talking about the trustlessness from the legal side and stuff, and I know we're in you're talking about closing different leaks, and different gaps in trust and contracts and things, and I get it from a base level, but what are the kind of impetus, or what is the outcome that you guys kind of foresee with the knowledge that you have on the legal side? What are the benefits that if we do close these leaks, or what does this technology allow? What do you guys think this technology allows you to get to at some point at that human coordination level? How are some ways that that instant settlement thing, for example, is really powerful, but what are some things about that would help a company or an organization? Do you think that this actually helps them perform better or execute better or stuff like that?
Yeah, I actually will jump in here because that's a good former transactional lawyer question. And when I lived that life, a big part of being a junior associate was doing closings, which, depending on the deal, even for a venture deal where you're talking about a couple $1 million, you're trying to collect signatures from a bunch of people, one of whom is inevitably in some tropical location on a boat or something, because their VCs are skiing in the Alps with their cell phone.
I'm on the chairlift right now.
Yeah, and then trying to get money wired on time, and then like 3 months later, the client's calling you and like checking, like, can we do this? And you're like, okay, now I've got to go through all these documents that we signed 3 months ago. And to put that, on chain would just kind of like automate that process of when the contract is signed, to have that like last signature automatically transfer or trigger the transfer of money, or the money or the wallet to be kind of like limited by the covenants in the contracts that have provided that money, whether it be loan money or equity investment, for the like cap table to automatically update with people's shares and the rights of those shares to be written into code. It saves just like a ton of administrative overhead. And I think like that's the big promise of like transactional blockchain stuff in the law, is that there's still so much like paper shuffling. And when you get to like, venture deals, it's still like a lot of paper and people are pretty friendly. But
this is even low level. We were quoted $30,000 to raise $300,000, like to help us with the paperwork on a $300,000 raise. It's like that's 10%. We just poured into lawyers, to make it. So if you think about DAOhaus, like we have 44 loot holders, in terms of when we raised, the transactional inefficiency that would have been chasing down those signatures and then getting the wires to happen and then getting the wires to happen to the right place and then cleaning up when inevitably like two of them land in the wrong place and now we don't have the money. Like there's just, it's humans all the way down. And so they just screw stuff up. A junior associate types in a single wrong digit on a 16 number routing situation. And then it's like, $100,000 of that didn't show up. What happened? And now you got to figure out what happened, and then you got to clean it up, and then somebody wants to sue somebody because it happened, and it just like, it turns into a cascading mess.
And then there are the like bigger things,
right? It snowballs.
Like large debt transactions where you still have these people. Like I only did one of them, but basically, you have large investors wiring hundreds of millions of dollars. And there are these like people who live in the dark back rooms of banks that like call each other and speak this like weird wire routing language. And, it's stuff like that where, that means the cost of administering a bond is always going to be, tens of thousands of dollars a year, because you need these like weird cave people to like talk to one another and administer the wires.
Giant spreadsheets and
it's just stuff like that. That's where I think like DeFi, can save probably like when it gets to the scale of the financial system, like hundreds of billions of dollars a year and just like paperwork and transactional inefficiency. I don't think it'll disrupt the system
and like
as much.
Well, I think what's exciting to me is that it that becomes a low-level access thing, right? If you're planning to raise $1 billion by going public, you're not worried about the million or two that you pay to the lawyers. But if you're just trying to raise the $300,000, that's 10% of what you were trying to raise. It's immediately going to go into the lawyers as sort of like a paperwork tax, and it becomes an access problem. Now you can't afford to raise money as a tiny company to do the thing that you wanted to do. Like, and that's not really how it's supposed to work. Like, it's supposed to be we allow corporations to exist because we think they're a public good, but then the public doesn't have access to them. And that's not really how the legal system's supposed to work. And so you can chase that kind of problem all the way down, right? If you want to go back to the landlord problem, like it's a fairly simple legal thing to get your deposit back if it's withheld, which like 1 out of 4 security deposits is straight up illegally withheld. And people don't enforce their right to go get it back because they think it's a lawyer problem, and lawyer problems get expensive. And part of that is because like for a lawyer to write a letter, it's going to cost you half your security deposit back. that you would get back, and so it's not worth it anymore. And now you're not getting to enforce your rights as a U.S. citizen. Like, that's just fucked up. So
yeah, and that's actually something I've been working on with this organization I helped start a long time ago. What feels like a long time ago, which is creating technology to serve that massive middle. Basically, if you live under the poverty line, you can access legal aid, but that's like a great option and overworked. There's something there. And then if you're rich, you can hire people who are like me. But for most people in like this giant middle, yeah, they have like legal issues, whether it be divorce or wills or landlord stuff or setting up businesses. And it's just like not easy and not affordable. And that's a lot of where, like, if blockchain could solve at least like the paperwork and admin stuff, it could drop the cost a bunch.
Right, which makes it more accessible. That's really important. That's cool. And I totally see your direct analogy there. I mean, yeah, there's like the direct example there from our raise also. Like, yeah, we did a whole raise in a week, and it was done. And now, 4 or 5 months later, we've actually like built some stuff, right? But with having to go through the loops that you talk about, like, we might still be trying to like chase down that initial funds or whatever, and may not have built anything in the meantime, and which obviously, like, is where failure emerges from, stagnation and world changes. You got to move with it.
Yeah, like we got a really cool case here of not having to endlessly fundraise. But like anybody who's been involved with sort of a traditional startup at the very beginning of their arc, the CEO's only job is to start the next raise. Like, cool, you guys go build a thing. Yeah. I'll attend meetings and otherwise try to make sure we get the next chunk of money in a year or so, 16 to 18 months. Like, yeah. And it's just, I don't know. It just, when you look at what's happening in our world of crypto, it doesn't feel like it needs to be that way necessarily. At least not transactionally. And that's the cool thing at the DAO space, because I think DAOs hit the thing that is otherwise, there's all the legal stuff about corporations, right? The sort of legal fiction and the personhood and the rights. But there's also reality of just a company as a group of people. And we have this sort of like emergent stack of things you use, notions of stock, boards, shareholders and votes. And, there's this structure that makes all that stuff work. And like I was saying before, I look at all of that as emergent from the need for apparatus to help with coordination once you scale past a point. That's also not that accessible. Again, unless you can raise enough money, right? If you have enough money to have the people inside of your organization that understand what like what a consent memorandum, like there's all kinds of just, if you don't know how to do it's where the lawyers end up picking up the paperwork. But it's sort of like, if you don't know how to run board meetings and then don't know how to do the minutes and you don't have, and you don't know how to like file the paperwork that goes with the decisions made at the board meetings, you're kind of cut out of this idea, this legal thing that we've come up with, that is groups of people who want to coordinate to do a thing should get special treatment. Like, we all have agreed that that's a public good. It's built into the legal system. And then you go, cool, I'm going to avail myself of that. And they go, okay, cool, that's going to be at least $100,000 a year in admin costs. Like, okay, well, shit, So that's the rant, I guess, on the legal side of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's exciting.
It's really exciting. Yeah. It's exciting to imagine like what's on the other side of that. Like, it's going to take us a while to like plug some holes and things, but a couple years time, like, right. I mean, there's such solid efforts on these things, and it's really exciting to see like where
well, like I was saying, and what I think is the cool thing about where we are right now is it's just happening. People just started going, okay, we're going to need some software to coordinate. What should that software do? And they built a company. Like, they built a corporation stack, you know, that is now what evolves as the DAO and has evolved, and you know, it's become its own different thing. But lawyers look at it and go, oh, that's you know, okay, so you have software to run your corporation, which is cool, because to me that sort of proves that we fall back on the same thing, right? Like shareholders voting, means of communication, so that the votes can happen and everyone feels the right way, you know, or feels like they're part of the endeavor and they have ownership of the endeavor, you know, sort of, etc. And so that makes that lets me go to the lawyers and say, you better get on board with this, because it's just happening, like with no lawyers involved. Right. They just built the thing and they're just doing it. And you're going to end up with this clients that are like, so I was in this DAO and this happened and now what do I do? Like, so you should at least understand what's going on in the DAO front. But I would hope people, you know, lawyers and legal engineers rather recognize, you know, that like it's what a revolution looks like ultimately. It just kind of, it happens and it grows, and then over here, and the people are organizing and they're doing the thing, and we're going, okay, that's the thing. Well, they just, that looks an awful lot like a company. You know? So
except it's moving a lot faster than ours.
Yeah, right. Like, oh, yikes.
Like, Jesus Christ, they have like 500 employees already. What the fuck?
Right. Which, you know, is I mean, you know, Raid Guild is a great example, right? We're up to like 80 members in a year. Usually it takes a startup 5, 6, 7, 8 years to scale up to 80 employees. Just functionally, like, just your HR department is like, whoa, slow down this hiring spree.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of friction. So, right.
Which just shows, again, friction points in if the idea is that people, you know, I keep falling back to the same thing when I'm rambling about this stuff, but like, if human superpower is coordination, the idea that your HR department slows that down, like, is potentially a failure in our ability to get people together, do a thing effectively when it needs to get done. People are going, well, we need to schedule some interviews. Like, well, maybe that's not always a necessary piece for this.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really excited about that too. Just general open access to contribution and things.
Anyway, for our listeners, our viewers, whatever we should say. Oh, I forgot to turn off my camera. I'm like wildly waving my hands around over here. For our viewers, LexDAO is a cool place to hang out if any of the previous conversation was interesting. We have a shiny new Moloch DAO we just got going on DAOhaus, so we're in there also. Otherwise, any cool DAOhaus updates to hit real quick? We missed that up front because of Ross's schedule. I feel like it's been a little slow with the holidays, so I don't know if there's too much in the way of housework to call out.
I mean, there's certainly. Well, yeah. What do you think, Deacon? What can we say? I think is the harder question.
We've got a new summoner process. So creating a new DAO is going to be a lot cheaper going forward, and you can have multiple summoners, multiple tokens. Some of the friction points that we noticed before, we've kind of got fixed now with the help of some of LexDAO coders and Bill and Ross, and so we got a new contract. It's on mainnet XDAI, all the test nets, and can now summon a DAO for a quarter of the price and have as many summoners. And what's kind of cool about this is this creates upgradable DAO. So old DAOs can now upgrade into a new DAO pretty easily if they wanted to, and keep all the same members and all that.
Yeah, and that new factory is amazing that Bill and Ross worked on. So well done, guys. It's going to be much better, and it makes the summoning process much easier, less errors, and it's also led to like a lot easier ways to update metadata for DAOs, so you can go in and add an avatar and stuff now.
we also the combined hub is up, right? We should probably call that one out. Is that ready?
It
or
is.
Am I the only one using it? I don't want to send anybody
still-
there if it's all.
We're still
gonna send
testing,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, I think anybody is free to use it. We're just not sending everybody there yet, but totally you can feel free to use it. I think at this point, there's a quick URL redirect you can get. It's just app.daohaus.club, or you can just do daohaus.gg, and I'll send you right into the new hub, which is So I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, y'all, but that one is like all networks are on that same interface. If you have DAOs on XDAI and mainnet, then it'll show both of them. You can quickly jump between all your DAOs and things. It'll show you activity across all those DAOs across all networks. It's just like one of those technical things, but damn, is it powerful. And then just kind of we're about a week or two probably from like really telling everybody to just go ahead and use the new interface, but we're just using it with a lot of people and collecting feedback and stuff.
Kick ass. I don't think there's anything else really updates wise. Rangers have some stuff brewing, but we'll bug you about that other places. So follow DAOhaus on Twitter. For people involved in the foundations call, we should mention this. The people that have been helping us with the foundations program, part of that, there's been a recent infusion of money into that DAO there, so that's cool. You guys will have, whoever ends up with the most shares by the end of the program will get their chunk of that. And we decided we're going to start doing a weekly call. So that's on Wednesday. It's also in the DAOhaus community calendar. But if you're in the foundations program, look for the notifications around that. We just want to do a half hour sort of chit chat with foundation people once a week to check in on the program and the feedback, etc.
Cool. Yeah, that's neat.
Otherwise, I think that's it. Thanks for listening, watching, hanging out for House Party Live this week.
Party on.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. See you all later.
Yeah.